Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today to find out how smart work design can support you in your roles as people leaders, or perhaps as someone who supports people leaders. My name is Lynn Gunning, and I'm Director of the Strategic Programs team within Comcare's Education and Engagement Group. My role today is to facilitate delivery of this webinar together with my colleague Tamara Wakeman. Tamara is a work health and safety professional and assistant director with a passion for helping people to design better work for better outcomes. On behalf of Comcare and in acknowledgement of Reconciliation Week, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are virtually meeting today. I'm joining you from Melbourne, so I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and the Boonwurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and I extend that respect to other First Nations people who are present today. A couple of bits of housekeeping. Today's session is being recorded for those who couldn't make it or if you'd like to watch it again. Throughout the session, if you have questions, please use the Q&A function to submit it, and we should have plenty of time to answer questions at the end of the webinar. We are also using Mentimeter today to ask you all some questions and hear from you. All responses are anonymous and will only be used in today's session. To join, please go to menti.com and enter the code 78115824, which is also on the top of your screen now. We also have a link in the Q&A to join directly. Today, we're going to really focus on helping you understand the value of using smart work design in your roles to make your work easier and more satisfying. Tamara and I will unpack the benefits for leaders in using SMART, what smart work design is, and what it can look like when leaders use it in their roles. We've got a few real life stories that we can share with you as well. We also want to give you some space to think about a current challenge that you're having at work and consider how you could apply a smart lens to it and tackle it in a slightly different way to how you might otherwise approach it. We're going to give you some ideas about how you can prepare your team to have conversations about work design and start using the same smart language. Finally, we've got 20 minutes at the end for a Q&A, so I hope you've come with some naughty questions for us. Before we get started, let's run a poll using Menti and see how confident everyone is feeling right now about using smart work design. All right, we've got a little bit of confidence there. Okay. Everyone's getting into the Menti. All right, so we've got very many very confident, we've got a little and not very confident, and a few that are not very sure at all. But that's really helpful for us to get a bit of an idea of where everybody's at today. Excellent, that's good. So a good foundational start. So I'd like to start with a positive assumption about the people that we work with. So most people want to do a good job at work because performing poorly doesn't make anyone feel very good. So your job as their leader is to really help them do a good job at work. In essence, what it really, because it really is what effective leadership looks like. So we know from research and experience that the best way to help people do good work is to make sure that they have good work to do. This is because well-designed work supports well-being, helps us perform well, and protects us from psychosocial risk. Having good work actually builds our well-being and makes us stronger. And the better our well-being and the more protected we are from psychosocial risks and stress, both inside and outside the workplace. So yes, we're a lot more protected at that point. The converse of this is that when our well-being is low, we're much more vulnerable to stress, injury and illness from risks like increased work demands, tight timeframes, poor relationships, or change. So I'll hand over to Tamara now to talk you through smart work design.
Thanks, Lynn, and hello, everybody. It's good to see that we've got quite a lot of people, more than 250 on the call, so fantastic. Thanks for coming. So the question is, why use smart work design? So in a nutshell, this is because smart actually strengthens work design for better work. So as Lynn has just been saying, having good work and strong well-being are critically important enablers to be able to do a good job at work, and particularly if we're thinking about sustaining performance over time. So our team at Comcare has been looking at how we can help people to design good work for about the past 5 years, and we have learned a lot, and we're keen to share some of that with you today. So we know that work design is a really big field, so people have different ideas about what it is. It covers all aspects of work, so not just what we do, but how we do it, including when, where, and who we do it with. So it very much goes beyond our tasks and our activities to our relationships and our responsibilities at work. So our team understands that Professor Sharon Parker's smart work design model is really unique in that it goes beyond responding to symptoms of psychosocial risks or poor performance or low innovation and addresses root causes. How do we know if our work is well designed from a psychosocial perspective? So basically, we just need to think about and consider how our work makes us feel. So for example, do you often feel anxious at work? Or maybe you feel bored at work? Or do you usually find your work stimulating and interesting? So poor outcomes at work, including burnout, disengagement, and turnover, are very often caused by how jobs are designed rather than individual capability or characteristics relating to the individual. So this means that our traditional responses, so things like training, could be wellbeing, using wellbeing apps or EAP, they're very much treating the symptoms rather than the problem. So we do very often fall into that trap of trying to fix the person and miss that opportunity to fix the work. So if you haven't seen SMART before, and I know that a number of you on this call have, so just bear with me if you have. This outlines, the SMART model outlines 5 really key themes to consider when designing or redesigning work that we know will help to ensure positive outcomes. I know this SMART framework is not the SMART goal setting framework that many of us are familiar with. S does not stand for specific. Before we go further, I do want to just emphasize at this point that SMART is, this framework is kind of a next generation, more powerful framework than your average framework that you're familiar with. So I know as someone working in the APS, we have a lot of frameworks, some of which are quite useful from time to time. But this one is going to be, a whole lot more useful to you if you really get into using it. So if you think of the difference between researching using AI online and how you used to search 5 years ago, often with mixed results, that's kind of the level of difference. And that's because SMART is an adaptable, evidence-based and practical framework that integrates learnings from literally over 100 years of work design and psychology research on what is important and what works. So yeah, so I can't emphasize it enough really. If you're only going to pick one framework to help you in your role as a people leader, this would be it. So in this SMART framework, S is for stimulating work. So that's very much work that challenges us, that is feels varied and interesting, makes us problem solve and basically use our brains. When work isn't stimulating enough, we feel bored and we often disengage, our motivation goes down, and often it looks like performance is going down too. So M is about having mastery at work. So that's that sense that I've got this, I have the skills, I know the work, and I'm performing to my potential. And we really develop mastery from having role clarity, from getting feedback on our performance, and also from seeing a task through from beginning to end. So A is for agency. That's having a sense of autonomy and control over how our work is scheduled, the methods that we use, and also our ability to make decisions. So I just want to note that autonomy is a performance lever. The research is clear on that. So delegating decisions as well as tasks is a quick way to lift engagement, motivation, and performance. R is for relational work. So that's essentially about the quality of our work relationships, particularly how supported we feel by our managers and colleagues, and how connected we feel to others and also to the purpose of our work. So it's also worth remembering that social connection is not a nice to have, but it's actually an essential part of good job design. And then finally, T is for tolerable work demands. So those are demands that we feel are sustainable. We can meet them without feeling overly stretched or understretched. And the demands are not creating role conflict for us. So obviously, there's lots of common demands, things like workload, work-home conflict, change management, conflicting expectations, and they're obviously not static. Demands might feel quite tolerable one day and they might feel, far too much next. So talking of tolerable demands, that T is very much the odd letter out here. So the T represents all the job demands that can pose a risk to people's well-being and health when they're not balanced by job resources that support well-being. So the S, M, A, and R elements are what we call job resources, and the idea here is to build up these elements of a person's job so that when the work demands increase, the person can meet them without feeling overwhelmed. I think as people leaders, which I'm assuming most of us on this call are, there will be times when we can't reduce the level of demands. So there might be a hard deadline, we might be having pressure from above, someone is off sick, and the work's still got to be delivered. If your staff are very clear about what they need to do, if they can choose how to do the work and preferably where to do the work, if they feel that you are giving them the support that they need, then they're very likely to rise to the challenge without feeling like their well-being is taking a big hit. So we're shortly going to be sharing some real life stories with you, but before we do, I just want to flag that there are 3 ways that leaders can support or enable smart work design. So the first one here is work redesign. And that's where those of us who are leaders collaborate with our workers to make changes to roles, tasks, responsibilities, relationships, or decision making that supports better outcomes. The second one is by activating job crafting. And so that's when we encourage and we enable our staff members to nudge and shape their work within their circle of control to better fit their needs. And of course, we can job craft in our own roles too. And we usually do because it makes it better. I do a lot of that. So the third one is that local leader behaviours. So that's where we behave in ways that support smart work. And those of us who have strong people management skills already do this unconsciously to some extent. But when we are aware of smart, we can do it much more intentionally and really lift both our skills and our impact. So I am just going to take the opportunity now to do a little bit of promotion about Comcare's existing and soon to be released resources. We currently have our Good Work Design resources for managers that use the theme of what great managers do. They're on our website and there's videos, there's better practice guides, and probably more importantly, there's team talks that can help you to discuss various issues with your staff. So these resources are really focused on those local leader behaviours that support smart. But more excitingly, we do have a whole new package of resources that's going to be published on the 31st of July. They're going to include case studies and also tools for workers to help them job craft. So adapting their work in small ways. So I'm not talking massive change here. It's within the role, within the constraints of the role, but in small ways that help make it feel more motivating and satisfying for them. So do look out for them, and we are also going to talk a bit more about how you can get started with using Smart shortly. And finally, I will just also flag that early next year, we expect to release case studies and tools for team leaders to help you redesign and work with your team. So keep an eye on our website is the message. And I'm going to hand back to you now, Lynn. I know you've got some stories to share.
Thank you, Tamara. We thought now would be a good time to share with you a few examples of how people leaders are using smart work design to better support staff. So my first example is when I supported a team member who was feeling isolated at work. I was having a routine performance development conversation with my staff member, and I used the smart work design questions from our team talk, just one from each of the smart elements, to really open up that discussion. What came through clearly was my staff member was working mostly on their own, and this was having an impact on their job satisfaction and their engagement. They were getting their work done and producing really good results, but they felt disconnected from others and their work was quite familiar and lacking in variety. So this obviously wasn't a performance issue, it was a work design issue. So if not addressed, it could easily have impacted the performance in the future or lead my staff member to start looking for another job elsewhere. So together we focused on two things: how to strengthen their relationships at work and how to make their work more stimulating and engaging. So we talked about different options and agreed on a few small but practical changes. So I supported them to join a cross-business working group. They helped with the procurement assessment process in another team, and they became our team's representative on a workplace advisory group right across the organisation. Now, these weren't major changes, but they were very deliberate. So over time, I saw a shift. They built stronger relationships across the organisation. They developed new skills, particularly in procurement, and they reported that their day-to-day work felt more varied and interesting. I had probably two key learnings from this experience. It showed me how making relatively small changes to how work is designed can have quite big impacts. And it also helped me realise how important it is to have really proactive conversations about work design at all the important touch points in an employee's life cycle.
I think those are really great points, Lynn. I think it's actually really easy to underestimate the impact of what appear to be quite small changes. And I think that we can really get stuck sometimes thinking that redesigning work is about making radical change, but it's actually much easier and more practical to make small incremental changes over time as our roles naturally evolve in response to changes in the broader context. So it's something that is, you want it to be the way you do things and the way you think about things ongoing.
Yeah, well, talking about the employee life cycle, my second example is about building confidence and autonomy in a new team member. So this was someone who just joined our team, and it became clear early on that they were struggling to find their footing in a team that was very different from the one they'd come from. They didn't yet understand our team's work, and they'd come from an environment where processes were quite rigid and there wasn't much room for autonomy. So again, I didn't see this as a capability issue. I saw it as an opportunity to rethink how the work was designed to help the new team member pivot more easily and maintain their well-being in a time of change. So I gave them a short-term project that involved transitioning the team to a file sharing platform. But instead of tightly directing it, I was really intentional about how I set it up. I gave them quite a lot of freedom in how they approached the project and the authority to make most of the decisions. I encouraged them to connect with each team member individually to understand what they needed. And I made space for them to use skills that they already had that weren't currently strong in our team, and really feel a sense of mastery. What that did was actually really powerful. They quickly began building relationships with each of the team members. They developed a much better understanding of our work and how it all kind of fitted together. They used and expanded their existing skills, and they experienced genuine trust and autonomy in how they worked. So by the end of it, they felt more confident, more connected, and were already contributing to the team in a very meaningful way. And I'll give you a quote from them in their own words. When Lynn gave me the green light to take the lead on this project, it made me feel like she genuinely trusted me with such an important project. I was surprised about the leeway that I had to make decisions. I know I can be trusted, but knowing I'm trustworthy and actually being trusted are two completely different things. I think that really demonstrates how actions speak louder than words when it comes to challenges like building trust. I was also a little taken aback by how big an impact it had on the individual from such a relatively small change. Tamara, I think you've also got a story to share.
Yes, I do. Thanks, Lynn. So the story I'm sharing is all in the words of the team member, and it shows how smart work design can help support health, well-being, and performance. So in the person's words, when I was in perimenopause, I'd gone from being highly capable, often juggling multiple things at work easily, to not remembering the most basic things. I'd sit in meetings and feel my eyes glaze over because I couldn't understand what I was looking at or what was being said. My concentration was worse in the afternoons. I'd find myself looking at my computer screen, trying to make sense of my work. My memory became worse. I couldn't remember the most basic instructions. I became so worried about being performance managed. I started looking for different, less responsible work so I could start fresh and where people didn't have the same expectations of me. In a catch up with my manager, it all came out. She could see that I'd been struggling, but rather than focus on my performance, she started the conversation by talking about my work design. In discussing what was working well and what felt difficult, she helped me identify things I could change at work, and some of them weren't complicated. Over several weeks, I trialled changing the start and finish times to when I was freshest. If sleep was bad, I slept in and started later. If concentration waned in the afternoon, I finished earlier. Booking meetings in the morning when I was generally freshest. Not taking on urgent tasks that require large mental load where possible. And getting a software license, which was Microsoft Copilot Pro, I could use in meetings to take minutes, transcribe and summarize important points. This meant I could come back and revisit meeting information if I forgot. So working this way made me feel like I had agency over how I worked. I could get high mental load work done when it was best for me and in a way that didn't impact my colleagues. Being able to revisit meeting minutes meant I had a greater chance of remembering what was discussed, which helped me to feel a sense of mastery over my work again. I was able to recall information in detail for discussion with colleagues and work more collaboratively. Before the conversation, I felt like I was letting my colleagues down. Implementing some of these work design changes helped me feel reconnected to my colleagues and helped strengthen our relationships. These changes made me feel better about my work. I felt confident again, knowing I'd made changes that supported me at work when I needed it. My relationship with my manager improved because I didn't feel like we were focusing on my performance. I mean, I knew how I was going. I felt supported because we talked about my work design and we were able to keep talking about my work design as my needs or symptoms changed. Okay, I know we had a pre-webinar question about work design in the era of AI, and I just think this is a really good example of how AI can support better work design. So I'm talking about that Microsoft Copilot Pro technology. So we know that this type of technology is especially useful for supporting people who are neurodiverse or who have other cognitive type challenges. And this is a very big topic, so we're not going to go into it further now, but I just wanted to add that AI, as well as being a real enabler, can also introduce or increase psychosocial risks. So, for example, through work intensification, through increasing role ambiguity, or by reducing autonomy. So it is something that you have to have that work design lens across, really. So I hope you can see from these real world examples how SMART is a really practical and flexible, universal approach that is applicable to everyone at work while also looking different for every person. So that really reflects the fact that we are all different, and to have success, we really have to tailor solutions to each person on that individual basis.
Thanks, Tamara. And just a reminder, if you do have any questions as we're going through, please add them into the Q&A and we can get to them at the end. So I'm going to jump into a current challenge for you at work and how SMART can help you address it. So it's a quick reflection activity. So what I'd like you to do is identify one current work challenge and note one way that SMART helped you to address it. So we're going to use Mentimeter again. So please put both your challenge and your idea for how SMART could help into Mentimeter. So this image might be a little bit small, so apologies if that's the case. You might want to zoom in on your screen.
So while you're doing that, I might just go first to sort of illustrate what we mean. I will give a couple of examples of how SMART can help. So in my current role, a challenge for me is helping people manage competing priorities across multiple projects or pieces of work. So several of the SMART elements are relevant to this situation, but I would particularly focus on ensuring that people have role clarity so that they know what they need to do and they feel the confidence that mastery gives. And this will really avoid indecision and hesitation and save time. The other thing I'll focus on is making sure people have the agency and control that they need to deliver the work efficiently and effectively. So enabling decision making at the right level will be key, and it will really support their sense of ownership and their motivation to step up when needed.
Okay, so we've got a few responses coming through there. So one is understanding direction. So relational work will help by having more catch-ups with my supervisor and advising what I am doing and what the next step will be. Insisting on these meetings will help. It's a good one.
We've also got one about agency, flexible working times, autonomy over timing of work tasks and methods. That's right. I just think it's such a gem to keep remembering how giving more agency and autonomy really helps people have that ownership and will help that performance.
Yep, there's one, a couple of there around challenges. So disengagement of staff members, a solution focus on quality of relations, knowing that the person and knowing the person and creating trust and space to exchange. So I think that's a really good one that
Yep, scrolling through quite quickly, which is not helping me see the questions.
Yeah, a little bit of role conflict in there. There's another new starter. Yeah, there's some good ones there.
Okay, maybe we should move on, but it's great to see that lots of people are having ideas here.
Yeah.
Yep, keep it up.
No, that's really great. I think we'll move on to using SMART in your day-to-day conversations and how it's going to make it easier if the people you're talking to are also familiar with SMART. So, as you start to really introduce SMART with your teams, you want everyone to be using SMART or using the same sort of SMART language so that they can more easily articulate work design issues. And also it helps us keep a shared focus on how to strengthen stimulation, mastery, agency, and relational elements to ensure work demands feel tolerable.
So this is why we developed the team talk that you can see on this slide. And that's available on our website in the About Good Work Design page. So it's designed to help you introduce smart work design to others at work and discuss with your team in a way that really enables people to have agency when and how to talk about work design. So
yeah, that's the team talk I referred to earlier in the example I gave of having a performance development conversation. So with a team member, so using that, and as I mentioned in my example, it includes a list of the possible questions for each SMART domain to help you get started or dig deeper when you're having those conversations about SMART. So if you can find this, or you can find this team talk in the link to our website in the pinned Q&A. But at its simplest, we can all ask people questions like, what is working well? What isn't working well? And what does this look like? And what opportunities are there to improve work? So now it's time to hear from you about your questions. So feel free to use the Q&A to submit a question of your own. But first, we'll, while you're sort of running through that, we'll answer a couple of questions we received in the registrations. So I'll kick off by, how does SMART apply differently in hybrid or remote teams?
Thanks, Lynn, and whoever asked that question. It's a great question. SMART itself doesn't change, but people's experience of work and the risk profile that they have when they're working remotely or in a hybrid arrangement does change. That is going to look a bit different. And actually that makes using SMART deliberately even more important, because there's really a lot less chance that good work design is going to happen naturally or organically when people are working remote from others. I would stress, again, it's really important not to make assumptions about how people are experiencing remote work. So really go in with curiosity for each individual, because it can be, it's going to be very variable with that. And sort of the risk profile, I guess, that you have in those situations, it's going to means every dimension of SMART is going to be relevant. So working remotely can, it can affect, the stimulation of your work. It can affect your ability to, feel that mastery. It can be harder to receive feedback, for example. And when it's remote, often it might mean that you're doing work that's a bit more routine or a bit less engaging. With agency, often that's a bit uneven. So you often have more agency, which is great. But that's not necessarily the case. And then relational is one of those big ones that is very likely to be more negatively impacted, I suppose, because to maintain and build relationships, you have to do that really intentional communication. And what I would suggest there, if this is something that you're struggling with in your situation, is having those non-work related, chats with people, doing it all the time, making that space for that. That's actually really important. It's not wasting time. That's the way you sort of get to know people, and you're going to be better at picking up cues for people when something might not be going so well for them.
Right.
Yeah, and also what the work demands look like is also going to look quite different, because there's things like that, work home boundaries shifting. People might, fall into the trap of doing work that's actually in their personal time, or maintaining that connection and answering calls, or that kind of thing. So there's a lot in there for that one.
Yeah. So let's go to the next one. What advice or tips can you provide managers to manage up when they've exhausted the options within their control?
Okay, interesting one. I think, if you've got to that point where you need to be clear that you have exhausted your options within your control, and be clear on what you've done, but what you think needs to be done next, and what that constraints that are sitting outside your control, what they look like. I think the challenge with this is to make design problems more visible to senior leaders. And ideally, I think if we can, introduce SMART right through organisations, so that everybody has had some contact with it, everybody's familiar with it, and you can use that SMART language, that will make it way easier to articulate issues. But otherwise, you're going to have to really translate the language into business and risk language and get it across that way. I think also being clear about what you think needs to be, changed or implemented is going to be really helpful.
Right. So we've got a few questions coming through now. So could you share some credible sources that show potential psychosocial risks associated with AI?
Professor Sharon Parker, who is the creator of the SMART framework, she has done quite a lot. I think she's involved in a lot of research in this space at the moment. So that's Curtin University, the Future of Work Institute. I would look out for anything that she's involved with. Yeah, and I think there's some more work being done nationally. I can't actually remember the name of the program right now, but really looking at that sort of impact of technology on work design and the psychosocial risks. So it's very much a double-edged sword. I know that much, but yes,
Yeah.
I would look for Sharon's work.
Yeah, and I've seen her talk a little bit too about AI. You've got to always consider the people, because the people are using AI. So there's always a human, quite a significant human factor and a change management factor in any element to do with AI.
Yeah,
We've got
great point.
one
Yeah.
there too. If an employee is returning from a severe workplace injury after 9 months, what types of factors should be considered when preparing a document for their performance development?
Ooh, for their performance development. I would
Well, it
avoid
might be
using
their
those words.
conversations. Well, it might be their conversation. It might be their performance development conversation, I suppose. Like
Well,
yeah.
yeah. So I would make it all about their work design. If they've had a fairly severe injury and they have been at work for 9 months, they need to feel super confident that you understand what they need to be successful at work. So that's what it's all about. So I would use SMART as a framework. You could use our SMART work design team talk tool, because that's got questions under each of the elements just to get you started. But I think using that, you can open up a conversation for them about what they're worried about, what from when they were back at work, what felt really hard versus, what was working well. So, and what their ideas about, what could be changed. I think you need to sort of really explore that. But I think it's a great opportunity, if you do that, to show that you hear them, that you're on their side, that you're prepared to make changes. And it's all about, when return to work, it's all about building that confidence that, people are not going to be reharmed when they return. And that would be a really wonderful start for that. I think personally, while smart work design is super important for preventing harm, I think it's just as important when it comes to returning people to work, because everybody needs good work to return to, and it's not having good work that is the biggest barrier to people coming back.
Yeah, and that conversation really builds that trust, and that's you get that discretionary effort, and the people are much more inclined to lean in, I suppose, and tell you what's not working, if they trust that you're actually on looking to support them as best you can. So this is a two-part question. How can SMART be used in scheduled work environments like call centres? And also, how can SMART be applied for workers whose core role requires exposure to potential aggression or distressed people and traumatic material?
Mm,
There's two
great.
parts to that one, but
Yeah,
yeah.
great question. We've actually got a case study that's in development that is in our from a high risk, high demands call centre. So that's something to look out for. So it is all about what you can change, that's within your control. So within the control of the team, within the control of the manager, there may be changes that you can request that are outside of your locus of control, and you can always do that. But there's usually quite a lot that can be done. And in call centres, the demands are really high. There's often not that, you can't, if you're answering calls from distressed people, you can't remove the distressed people, right? So you can't really impact those demands directly. That's where SMART can play such an important role, though, because what you need to focus on is getting the stimulation, the mastery at work, as much agency as you can possibly build in, and the really strong relationships, so people feel really supported by their co-workers and their leadership team. And if you get all of that right, you are going to help to balance out those work demands, which isn't to say that it's going to work, perfectly all the time and support everybody, but that's what success, I think, looks like in that situation. So it's really digging deep and doing that in a really collaborative way with all of the workers, and having them drive it as much as possible, give them the agency in making that change.
Yeah. So here's a nice kind of wrap-up question, I think, or where can I find tools that I can use to support my team become confident users of the SMART technique?
Okay, great question. Thank you, whoever answered that. So that's exactly what we are trying to do at Comcare at the moment, is to, design and test and produce really pick up and plug and play tools that you can pick up and use straight away. There's not a lot out there. I know Curtin University have got some on the Future of Work, Centre for Transformative Work Design website. They've got some great videos that help explain what each of the domains of SMART, what that can look like. The Thrive at Work website is another that's been developed by Curtin as well, and that's got more resources, and I know that it's in the process of being redeveloped at the moment. So I would definitely check that out. But where we're aiming for is something that is a little bit less academic and a little bit less focused on the systems and the HR and work health safety, introducing it and having it flow down. What we want to do is make sure we're developing the tools that people can use from the bottom up, and also in the middle at that team level as well. So that's what we're going to be doing over the next 2 to 3 years. We're going to have our toolkit for individuals on the 31st of July. Early next year, we're expecting to have our toolkit for teams, and we are going to keep working on what the agency can do at that higher level. And down the track, I hope that we will look at how we can better shape systems to support better work.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tamara. That's a lovely conclusion there, and a nice segue into the fact that we're following up today's webinar with another one on the 30th of July called Words That Work, Using Smart Language for Better Work and Conversations. That will be a deeper dive into how to frame conversations using SMART to help shift from problems to workable solutions. So we've got a guest speaker from Geoscience Australia coming in who will share her experience using SMART and will also answer your questions. On the 14th of September, we're holding a 2-hour in-person pre-conference workshop in Canberra titled Fix the Work, Not the Worker. Great title. Using the Smart Work Design model in everyday leadership. So at only $75, this is a great opportunity to participate in a hands-on activity, share learnings and insights with your peers, and walk away with a clear path for using Smart Work Design in your work. In addition to that, the Comcare conference is on the 15th and 16th of September in Canberra this year, and the theme is a people-first approach to workplace health and safety. So that's shaping up to be another great conference with some excellent sessions, and we hope to see some of you there. We also have an upcoming knowledge session on controlling the risks of potentially traumatic materials, which will discuss how organisations can strengthen their approach in mitigating risks. This will be a great session with Comcare's CEO Colin Radford and Amy Nicholas, a subject matter expert in vicarious trauma mitigation. So registrations are open today, so keep an eye out on our website. So that just about wraps up our session today. But before we let you go, we have one more question for you in Mentimeter about what you'd like to hear more about in relation to work design in future. So a short survey will also be landing in your inbox shortly, so you can scan the QR code on the screen and click the link in the or click the link in the pinned Q&A. To complete it now. So it only takes a couple minutes, and it really does help us shape future sessions. And if you'd like to revisit today's session or share it with colleagues who couldn't make it, the recording will be available soon on Comcare's website. So we would really like to thank you for joining us. Take care, stay safe, and we hope to see you all at our next event. Thank you.